Welcome to Coach Bennett's podcast, where every run has a purpose, where kindness is hardcore, where this is about running, and this is not about running, where every starting line is a finish line in disguise, where rambling still gets you where you need to be, where pineapple will never ruin your pizza, and the sodas, adult and not adult kind, are always cold, and where there is room on the starting line for everybody. I'm Coach Bennett. Thank you for letting me be a part of your day. Let's get started. Welcome to episode 92 of Coach Bennett's podcast. As of this moment, I don't have a title for it. Now, by the time you're listening to this, there will be a title for it, but I just can't think of one. And the reason why is because as simple as the concept is, or the subject is, I can't simplify a title to wrap up what I'm talking about. Now, without, the limitations of a title, this episode is going to be about how much you have in common with professional runners, or what we would consider elite runners, although I don't want to use that term, and I'll tell you why in just a little bit. Because I was sitting down recently next to Grant Fisher, who has set two world records so far this indoor season in the 5K and the 3K. And I was also watching a panel discussion of a group of women, some in high school, some that were coaches, and one that is a professional athlete, Sinclair Johnson. And I'm not going to say it dawned on me. It just reminded me that we are so close to what the professionals are doing. We have so much more in common with professional runners than we have not in common with them. In fact, I would say that the biggest difference is just the times on our watch, the numbers, and in some cases the volume, but not always the volume. And yet we think there's so much different between us and them. Now, this is something I've known for quite some time. Not because I was ever at the level of some of these professional athletes, but I was lucky enough for a number of years to train alongside a number of professional runners, and very successful professional runners that had made it to the top of the profession, runners that were national champions, runners that were world championship qualifiers, runners that were Olympians, and I got to be teammates of a number of these athletes. I got to be good friends with a number of these athletes. And like I said, I got to train with a number of these athletes. And as I was coaching high school and trying to, make my athletes fans of the sport, to have them, fall in love with the sport, I wanted them to see these athletes competing and learn from them. And in order to learn from them, they needed to have a connection, or at least I knew that they would learn more from them if they felt they had something in common with them. And I used to tell them that they go through many of the same things that you go through. They experience many of the same things that you experience. And maybe initially it was hard for them to fathom that somebody that's lining up at the World Championships is going to have a lot in common with someone who's lining up for the Monmouth County Freshman 1600 meter championships. But over time, they realized it. They saw the similarities, the commonalities that they shared with these people. And it just drove it home to me over the last week and a half, maybe. I think that was the length of time between the panel of women runners and coaches, which was put on by Wildwood Running here in Portland. My daughter, one of my daughters, was on the panel, and listening to the athletes speak, again, reaffirmed what I had already known, but really drove home to me that I need to share it. And then sitting next to Grant 2 nights ago, for at least 2 nights ago from when I'm recording this, again, it was those commonalities that he was talking about, the breakthroughs and the barriers, the struggles, the joy, and where he found the joy in his running, how he was trying to improve. If you took away the world records, if you took away the times and the national championships he's run, it could be that you were listening to someone that was getting ready to run a freshman championship, or someone that's been running for 6 months or 6 years and just loves the sport and wants to get better in the sport and enjoys this sport and wanted to share their earned wisdom with others. So that's why I want to talk about this here on episode 92, because I want all of you to realize that if you take a starting line and cross it in the hopes of getting closer to better, in the hopes that you can be your best in some way, that you have so much in common with what we would consider the best runners on the planet. And I know you may be thinking, no way, coach. I have no idea what you're talking about. I run a couple days a week. Every once in a while I do a turkey trot. Maybe I'll try to do a half marathon. Or no way, coach. I'm brand new in the sport. Or no way, coach. I used to run in high school competitively, but I don't run anymore for those reasons. I run for these other reasons where I'm trying to be my best or better. Well, guess what? All of y'all are wrong. You do have so much in common with these athletes. And lastly, what I'm hoping is that by the end of this episode, you're an even bigger fan of those athletes because you see a little bit of yourself in them. So let's break down just how much you have in common with these professional athletes, shall we? Okay, let's start with the training. Now, the majority of training that the professional athletes do is built around recovery runs. In terms of volume, it's going to be their recovery runs. As I was sitting next to Grant and we were talking about, what's the volume that you run in a given week, he says about 100 miles. Now, most of you are thinking, well, there we go. We're not alike, because he does 100 miles and I do 10 miles a week or 20 miles a week or 15 miles a week, or I run 30K a week or 50K a week, or I run 100K a week, which is still 40 miles less than what he's doing a week. But it's not about the volume. As he mentioned right after he told us his volume, he said, "This is my job. I don't have to go to work like so many of you do." So here's something that's very interesting, and I loved the fact that he felt it was important to bring that up, because we always diminish. So many of us immediately diminish what we do when it comes to running. I've told many of you that a lot of times the first thing you'll say to me before you introduce yourself is, "Hey, coach, I suck at running." Or, "Hey, I got a question for you. I'm not that good at running." We're always diminishing. And this is just when you're talking to me. I imagine it's even worse when you're talking to yourself. So if your first reaction was, "Oh my goodness, he runs 100 miles a week," which is over 150 kilometers a week, and your first thought was, "Well, there we go. I'm nothing like him. I don't do that." Well, let's just do a little exercise here. Let's pretend you're a teacher and you show up at work every morning at around 7:30 a.m. so you can be there in your room for students that may have questions. And then you teach 5 to 6 classes a day. By the way, the best way I've ever heard what teaching is like described was years ago when a colleague of mine described teaching to a friend of his. It's like putting on 5 or 6 Broadway shows a day to the toughest, most critical audience you can imagine. Teenagers who will sniff out BS, who will see that if you're not interested in it, if you're not passionate in it, they don't need to be passionate in it. They want to be entertained, not in a way that things are dumbed down, but that they are invigorated. You are putting on performance after performance every day. And when you come back the next day after a series of great performances, you got to give more great performances. And I thought, whoa, that's the truth. So you give these 5 or 6 performances a day. A lot of times you may have a cafeteria duty as well. So many teachers have jobs after school, maybe as a coach, maybe as a proctor, maybe as tutoring. Then you get home. You have your life, which has its own set of obligations and responsibilities. And then you have work that you have to do that you brought home. So now you're reading papers or grading tests. You're going through your plan for tomorrow. Then guess what? You go to sleep and you do it all over again tomorrow. Now, that's not everything though, because you run. So somewhere in there, you snuck in a run. You got in 5 minutes or 5K or 5 miles or 50 minutes, whatever it may be, you got it in the midst of everything else you did. See, there's a level of excellence there when you can get in a run after your job, before your job, during a break with your job, in your job. So let's not be diminishing ourselves right off the bat when I tell you he runs 100 miles a week, because you don't have the same situation that he's got, nor does he have the same situation that you got. I can tell you this, he's not running 100 miles a week at that quality with that consistency if he's doing your job. So when I tell you that the training has similarities, has commonalities, what I'm talking about is that if you're running a couple of days a week, if you're in a training program towards a race of any distance, the majority of your volume is going to be recovery runs, easy runs, correct? Yes. You're also going to have speed runs, as does Grant Fisher, Sinclair Johnson, any other athletes that are at the elite or professional level. They're trying to mix in speed work. They're trying to make sure that they can recover from those harder efforts and still be able to do those easier efforts and get benefits from both so they can progress forward. The training is very similar. If you look at where you have availability to train and where they have availability to train, you're going to see similarities. And all of those similarities are based on goals, right? Whatever your goal may be, that's what's influencing your training, or at least it should. That's why every run you do has a purpose, just like the professional runners. Every run they do has a purpose. It could be to build endurance, increase strength. It could be to get time on their feet, to callous themselves mentally or physically. They have purpose, just like you do. So when you're looking through your training plan and saying, what do I have this week? Well, let's see. I've got 2 recovery runs. I'm going to do a fartlek, and I'm going to do a long run. Every run you do has purpose. There is meaning behind those minutes, meters, and miles, just like a professional athlete. And they're tied to your goals, just like a professional athlete. And those goals can be infinite in their variety, and you should have a number of goals. It could be that over this period of weeks that you're going through right now, the goal is really to just build a foundation again, because maybe there was some time off. Maybe it's a comeback from a race that had its own training cycle and you needed some downtime and now you're coming back. The goal could be to re-find the joy that you had with this sport that maybe seemingly disappeared or was diminished by you, by the intensity of the running, by other people, who knows, by other things you had going on in life. All of these goals are very similar to the goals that these professional athletes have. They are setting multiple goals within their training programs, within their runs, within this week may have its own particular goal, which is different than next week's, but they build together around this month's ultimate goal, which then builds towards this season's ultimate goal, which then builds towards this year's ultimate goal. So what you'll find is these athletes have lots of different goals. Not all of them are medal at the Olympics. Some of them are, let's incorporate strength training into our larger training framework without sacrificing progression. It could be, let's work on our form because we tend to break down at the end of our speed runs. It could be making sure that this time around, as we build up our volume, we're doing it in a way that's maybe a little bit more informed, a little bit more intelligent, so we don't run the risk of injury like we've done in the past. There's always something that they're working on. No matter how small or how big, all of those goals are valid. It's another thing to take with you that your big goals and your little goals, your daily goals and your weekly goals, your yearly goals, the goal you have in this moment on this run, they're all valid. They should be respected. Don't belittle what you're doing to get better. Don't do that. The best athletes, if we want to say best is all about the time on a clock, well, I think we should expand the definition of best. But if we're going to limit it to that, like so many runners do, which, by the way, also limits so many other aspects of the sport. But let's just have a little thought exercise and limit greatness to a time on a clock. Well, if you just focus on the athletes that have the fastest times on the clock, they have so many goals, they don't belittle any of them. They respect all of them. Doesn't mean they're all going to be easy to get. Doesn't mean they're going to achieve any of them. The point is they respect them. So make sure you are respecting your goals like the best runners respect their goals. They also are aware of and work on both their strengths and their weaknesses. They have to if they want to be the best they can be. And yet, instead of taking that lesson, so many of us focus on our strengths and ignore our weaknesses, or pretend they don't exist, or take ourselves out of situations where we could be working on those weaknesses or expose those weaknesses. Now, there's a whole lot we can unpack here about why we do that. But if we just acknowledge the fact that we've got both strengths and weaknesses, we're going to be a lot more like those professional athletes. This may be the toughest one of all, and maybe this is the biggest disconnect, but you will see professional athletes each season work on the weaknesses they exposed in the previous season. Maybe it's they have a tendency to run from the back and kick. And the next year, you'll see them doing distances that maybe are a little longer than they did in the past, whether it's in training or in racing. Their tactics will adjust a little bit because they've exposed some weaknesses in their race strategy or plan or training. So they want to shift how they race. And again, that strategy, those changes that you see in the races will have an equal shift show up in the training so they can take advantage of those changes in the races. So what you'll see is those athletes, they don't run away from the things they're not great at. And great coaches will be running towards their athletes' weaknesses because that's where we see progression, because that's where we see opportunity. That's where we see upside. So if you're someone who exposes your own weaknesses, who embraces their weaknesses because you want to work on those weaknesses, then you have yet another thing in common with these professional athletes. Another thing that professional athletes will tell you is essential to their success is inspiration and motivation. And it's not saying that they always have it. It's that it's necessary for them to be their best, which means when they're low on inspiration, when they're low on motivation, one, it's essential to admit it because you can't work on something that you pretend doesn't need to be worked on or is not an issue. Another thing that you'll hear professional athletes, the elite athletes, the best of the best athletes, if we're measuring it solely on times, that they need is inspiration and motivation, just like you need inspiration and motivation. They will tell you they're running their best when they are inspired, when they are motivated. They're able to take on harder training, more training when they're inspired and motivated. And they will also tell you they're not always motivated and inspired. It's very easy to imagine that these great athletes that we see at World Championships and Olympic Games are always motivated and inspired. How could they not be? Their goals are massive. They're epic. How could you not wake up every day and be inspired when the goal is to be the best in the world, right? Well, because they're human. And sometimes they're tired physically, emotionally, mentally. Sometimes the goal just seems ridiculous. Why am I sacrificing Friday nights? Why am I putting myself in a position to be tired? Why can't I just stay in bed when I have a run that I've got to go to? Why do I have a run that I've got to go to? It's raining out, it's sleeting out, it's snowing out, it's windy, it's cold, it's hot, it's humid. I don't feel like running. Yeah, sound familiar? Do you think they don't experience that? Do you think every run is just puppy dogs and ice cream? I've got a news flash for you. It's not. It is not. Just like you leave work and you've got a run planned and you are uninspired, unmotivated to start it, they feel those same things. And guess what? Sometimes the run doesn't get done. And there's an opportunity now to beat yourself up, to tear yourself down, to say, I'm soft. It's not going to happen. If I can't start this run, how am I going to be able to start a race against the other best athletes and beat them, or at least compete alongside them as best as I possibly can? Sound familiar? All you got to do is take away some of the adjectives and put in other adjectives like, how am I possibly going to do this half marathon if I can't even do the recovery run I'm supposed to do? How am I ever going to break 4 hours in the marathon if I'm skipping a speed run, or if I'm not inspired to do the work, or if I'm not motivated to do these last 4 weeks of training? Yeah, they go through the same things because they're human. It's just how it goes. But we sometimes can put these athletes on such a pedestal in such rare air that we can think, well, they're just surrounded by inspiration and motivation all the time. It's not true. They struggle with it as well. I think that's a wonderful thing to remind yourself when you are struggling with inspiration and motivation, that the world's best runners go through what you're going through right now. You have an affinity with these best runners. They have an affinity with you, which I think is an even more powerful way of looking at it. They have this in common with you. It's not just you having it in common with them. It's amazing how your point of view can change what you're looking at, can change what you're looking at looks like, right? I mean, there's a great exercise that you can do with students, which is also a good reminder for teachers as well, not just the students, where you look at a classroom from where you're sitting, and then you stand up next to your desk and you look at the classroom. You're going to notice things that you didn't notice when you were sitting down. You've got a different point of view of the same room. Then you stand on your desk. You're going to have a different point of view of that very same classroom. And if you've got a cool teacher that's got a strong desk, you can stand on their desk and you're going to notice a very different point of view. The class will look different from up there. It's good sometimes to put yourself in positions that maybe you're not used to, because you're going to see the world in a slightly different place. And if you look at it from a different point of view here, where you think the world's best athletes struggle with motivation, they've got that in common with me. The world's greatest athletes aren't always wildly inspired. They have that in common with me. And yes, you can do the exercise where you have it in common with them, but I think sometimes it's good to let it be them having it in common with you. Another thing that you share with the world's greatest athletes is failing. That's right. It's so easy to see them and think they don't fail, or they don't fail as much as you do. Let me tell you this. As you get better, as you get faster, the rate of failure for most people increases if you're measuring it in a very narrow way. I'll give you an example with me. The faster I got, the better I got, the less I won. Without a doubt, it dropped to a point where I basically never won a race when I was at my best. The fastest I ever was as an athlete in track and field, I stopped winning races because I was getting into races with better people. And guess what? I couldn't beat them, no matter how well I ran. And when I ran my fastest, there were faster people. Every single personal best I set, I was behind people. Always. It's kind of interesting when you think about it. It's no different for the world's best athletes. I mean, what we do sometimes is we pay attention to that first person crossing the line, maybe the second and third. In track and field, especially 1, 2, and 3, they get our special attention. Maybe we'll go back to fourth or fifth, or the final, right? Maybe if we really have a wide aperture in the way we view the world, we look at those 12 athletes that make the final in the 1,500 meters. Well, remember at the World Championship, there were 30-plus runners. Not all of them made it to the final. Do you think those athletes that didn't make it to the semifinal and had a goal of making it to the final aren't dealing with feelings of failure as they watch the semifinal? What about those athletes that made the semifinal, that wanted to make the final and potentially medal, but they couldn't make the final for whatever reason? Do you think they're not dealing with feelings of failure? Feelings of failure that are strikingly similar to those feelings that we have when we don't achieve a goal, when we don't run as great as we thought we were going to, when we make a mistake tactically or strategically, when things just don't work out. Do you think what they're feeling is markedly different than what you're feeling? Do you think those athletes are just thinking, I'm one of the world's best athletes, so when I don't achieve my goals, I'm still great? Well, I would hope they'd feel that way, but I'll tell you what, they also feel like they failed. They're going to have to process that. They're going to have to deal with it. Hopefully, they learn from it. They're supportive to themselves, and they're better as a result, but it's not going to change the fact that they're going to have to deal with a failure, just like we have to deal with failures. It's the same thing with those professional athletes when it comes to injury and sickness, where they feel like these setbacks could become step backs, and they get concerned, they get stressed, there's anxiety that's associated with it. But guess what? They get sick, they get injured, just like we do. And yes, it can be very difficult to deal with sickness and injury, not just while you're sick and injured, but coming back from sickness and injury, being patient when you're coming back from sickness and injury, maintaining your confidence while you're hurt or sick, and maintaining your confidence while you're coming back. All of these things are experienced by the world's greatest athletes. We sometimes think they live in a world that doesn't include these very human things. Guess what? They do. They absolutely do. And once again, it could help you as you're going through sickness and injury to listen to some interviews or podcasts with some of these great athletes where they talk about dealing with sickness and injury, dealing with the doubts that come along with sickness and injury. And it can help you, just like a teammate telling you how they got through it can help you. And just like how you telling someone else how you got through it can help them. Again, you are so close in so many ways to the world's best athletes. They also have lives. They do. I know. We forget about that. We think they just show up at meets and major championships and do their running and then disappear until they're put on display again under a spotlight in a really cool kit, racing for our pleasure. But guess what? They have lives, and they have responsibilities and obligations that go along with those lives. They have arguments with loved ones. They have people in their family that are going through stressful times. They have birthdays and retirements, and they have deaths in the family. They live real lives. Yes, they can do something extraordinarily well. They can go around an oval very, very quickly, 12 and a half times, but they overcooked their steak, and they don't know how to make rice. And they asked for no onions on their salad, and there's still onions on their salad. The person sitting behind them in the movie theater has their feet up on their seat. And come on, people, put your feet down. If somebody's sitting in front of you, don't put your feet on their seat. It's just common courtesy. But it happens. It happens to everybody. And it happens to the world's best runners. They have to navigate life just like we do. It's a really good thing to remember. This doesn't diminish in any way the life that you're leading. It doesn't diminish the stress and the anxiety that your life includes when you acknowledge that other people have anxieties and stressors in their life as well. Sometimes, and some of this is because of social media, people can feel like it's a contest. Who suffers more, and that if someone admits that they're going through some problems, that rather than being kind, supportive, empathetic, the proper thing to do is to actually remind these people that there are people going through far worse things, that maybe you're going through far worse things. Well, guess what? That's not what you need to do in a situation like that. It's not a contest. You're not getting a ribbon because you have more stress in your life than a person who's admitting that they have stress in their life. So that's just a little sidebar, a little bit of a ramble. I think we could all be a little bit kinder to each other. But it is a good reminder that when you have things going on in your life, and again, they don't all have to be negative. Sometimes you've got great things going on in your life, and there's a lot of excitement, and there's a lot of time commitment that you have to give to certain things that maybe the training, the running is not getting the attention that it normally would, or maybe you're putting out a lot of energy towards something that's wonderful, that you're passionate about. Well, guess what? We've got only so much energy that we can give. And sometimes that means there's going to be a little bit less energy going to running, and you're going to have to make some adjustments. That doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're a bad runner. It means that you're a human being. And these greatest athletes, they've got to make those adjustments too, just like you do. Another thing you have in common with them. And some of that has to do with their mindset, which they're always working on. They're trying to make that mindset work for them in the best possible way. Another thing that all runners at all levels, at all experience levels, and volumes of running and paces of running, we all are trying to work on a better mindset. And this could be from 30,000 feet, we're looking at our mindset, and it could be our mindset on this run in this moment. They struggle with the same things. They struggle with the same doubts. They have that teammate too in their head that's telling them they're no good, they're too weak, they suck, they're not strong enough, they're over the hill, or they can't make it to the top of this hill. They have that teammate too. The question is, how do they best deal with that teammate? Just like how you can best deal with that teammate. So don't think this separates you from the best runners in the world. No, having mindset issues or working on having a better mindset, it's the same deal. It's another thing you have in common with the world's fastest athletes. Your needs as a result of what you're trying to do. Your needs, whether it's sleep, nutrition, the joy and peace that you need in your life, the stability you need, but also the freedom to take risks and be vulnerable. All of those things are components of being one of the world's best athletes. They have the same needs that we've got. We focus sometimes so much on how our lives are so different. Well, I'm a teacher, I'm a nurse, I'm a librarian, I own a bookstore, all of these different things. Like how could an Olympian, feel like they have anything in common with me? Well, because if you think about the needs you have in your life to do your job well, right? You ideally you have a community that supports you. You're getting enough rest and recovery. You've got outlets beyond what you do for a living, which could be being a nurse, could be being a teacher. You have other passions, hobbies, things that you can put your focus on. So your entire focus is not on the running, or in this case, your job. So when you come home, how do you decompress from what you've been doing all day? It's the same thing for these quote-unquote elite athletes. Those needs that they have, the necessities in life so they can be the best they can be at what they're trying to be, they're the same. They're the same. We sometimes think like, well, they need to spend hours doing strength training and they need to spend hours doing their running and the volume's so high and their nutritional needs are a little bit different. Yeah, absolutely. But you're getting so into the weeds to try to find differences that you're not giving yourself the distance to see all of the commonalities you have with them. And I'm telling you what, you're going to be a better runner if you can see these similarities. And then lastly, the basics, right? The basics. These greatest runners, right? They got to love it. And they got to experience joy with it if they're going to be their best, just like you. If you don't love it, you're never going to be as good as you could have been. If you don't experience joy with it, you're never going to run as fast as you could have run. You need love and joy in this sport, just like the world's greatest athletes need love and joy with this sport. If you've got those two things, you got a shot for whatever your goal may be, whether it's run a 5K without stopping or run a world record in the 5K. You have the best possible shot if you love it and you experience joy when you do it. Because I'll tell you what, it's going to be hard. A lot of people think when I say you need love and joy, that means, oh, what you're saying is it's going to be easy. No, it's the opposite. If you're trying to do something better than you've ever done before, if you're trying to be the best you can be, it's going to be difficult. Whatever it is, it's going to be a real struggle at times. No doubt about it. Those are the facts. That's the truth, which is why you're going to need to love it and experience joy with it to get you through the hardest stuff. So you can come back on the line and do another. So you can come back to another starting line on another day. So you can get through those setbacks and they don't become step backs. So when you are dealing with injury or sickness or a bad night of sleep or that dog that won't stop barking, when you're in traffic and you're getting anxious and you're getting stressed and you're thinking, I'm losing motivation, I'm losing inspiration, it's that foundation of joy and love that's going to get you to the starting lines you need to get to. And that joy and love is going to give you the strength you need to cross those starting lines and do what you need to do on the other side of those starting lines. It doesn't matter if you're the two-time world record holder like Grant Fisher, or you're Frank from Duluth, or Sheena from Memphis, or Siobhan from Dublin. The point is, you need those things if you want to get to be close to your best. Just like it is for the best in our sport. And I think if you can make that connection between you, who I'm talking to right now, you, and the world's best, in quotes, athletes, you're going to realize you have more in common with the world's best athletes than you have not in common with them. That's a pretty powerful piece of information to take with you. And take it with you, because if you can bring it to all those starting lines in your life, and not all of the starting line, and I'm not limiting this to just starting lines that lead to runs. I'm talking about any starting line that leads to something new in your life. You have a better chance at being your best. And that's it. That's episode 92, which I still don't have a title for, but I'm going to figure it out. But anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing or following to Coach Bennett's podcast. I hope you're subscribing or following the podcast on whatever platform you're on. And if I can ask, I ask every episode. This is like going to be the 92nd time I've done it. Please leave a rating if you haven't already on whatever platform you're listening. Please leave a review if you haven't already. And please share the show, okay? Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and I'll meet you on another starting line. Thank you so much for listening to Coach Bennett's podcast today. And if you haven't already subscribed or set yourself as a follower to the podcast, I really hope you would. And make sure you check out the show notes, because in those show notes, you're going to find a link to Coach Bennett's newsletter and all the social media sites I'm on, like Instagram and Threads and Cameo and Blue Sky and Nope, not on that one anymore. So all the ones I am on, you're going to find it in the show notes, so check that out as well. And as always, thank you again for listening to Coach Bennett's podcast. Until next time, you keep taking care of yourself and each other.